This presentation is Relational Resilience, a systemic perspective on resident well-being. We're going to start by introducing ourselves. We don't have any disclosures, unfortunately, as most people say. I am Grace Pratt. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am the behavioral medicine faculty at Integris Great Plains Family Medicine in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. My background is in medical family therapy and really thinking about these family integrations and systemic integrations in our healthcare and especially in our learners.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aubry Koehler. I am hailing from Winston-Salem, North Carolina this morning. We've recently undergone a name change. So I work for both Wake Forest School of Medicine and also Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist, which we're told not to abbreviate, but boy, is that a mouthful. I was 1 year behind Grace Pratt at East Carolina University. I am a medical family therapist. I recognize Lauren Booth. We were at Concord Hospital together in New Hampshire. Yay, so happy to be here. I work with residents and also with a behavioral health care team here doing integrated care in our primary care treatment.
I am Cori Davis, and I am a PhD student at East Carolina University and a medical family therapist. I'm currently doing my doc internship with Dr. Pratt at Great Plains Family Medicine. So I'm here from Oklahoma today, and I'm excited to be with you all.
And my name is Allissa White, and I am a third-year family medicine resident that gets the opportunity to work with Dr. Pratt and Cori Davis.
Dr. White is also our wellness resident, which is a kind of wellness champion position that's a leadership role that we created. And this is her second year to hold that role. And so she is responsible there for supporting our wellness efforts, being a voice for the residents in thinking not only about what we're doing individually, but also at the system level. And she's been wonderful in that role. So I don't want to miss mentioning that. We have a few objectives for our talk today. We want to spend a few minutes reviewing the scope of the problem with residency and burnout. Not a ton of time there because we know that is such a part of the conversation. It's been interesting to see the shift even in the 7 years that I've been in this role and how we're talking about it and the perspective that we're taking. Then we're going to do some really fun theory. Maybe just for some of us, but I really love theory. And we're going to think about how we can use this model, the family adjustment and adaptation response model and systems theory to understand our learners' resilience, not just in them and affecting them, but also their family systems and the larger residency system and healthcare system. And then we're going to practice a couple of experiential exercises that can be used to help support our learners to examine their needs and supports that could be practical, boosting their resilience. So first, Cori is going to talk about the problem.
All right, and so first we're going to talk a little bit about residency wellness. And I think one thing that is important to note, and that not that we already didn't know this, but just so we keep this in mind and remember this, that wellness is more than the absence of illness, meaning that wellness encompasses more. And one way to encapsulate this is through the BPSS model. And so the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual elements of a person give a good picture of what it looks like to look at a holistic view of wellness. And so in addition to that, wellness is also a systemic process involving multiple areas of ourselves as the individual, but as well as our relationship with others in our family, our chosen family, our residency, our work, and our community in the larger aspect. And so just as a refresher, what really is resilience? We use it as a big blanket term for a lot of things, but it's defined as the ability to recover after times of stress. And so the ability to bounce back. And so I think it's important to remember that resilience doesn't mean that things are not hard or that we can just handle a whole bunch of difficult things. It's the ability to bounce back afterwards and be able to move on and be able to continue in our role. And that's something that's not only on the responsibility of the resident or the person we're talking about, but it's in the responsibility of the system and the larger groups around the person. And so what makes us able to bounce back. And a lot of times that is our relationship with others, our family, our community, our program, those kind of things. And so what is relational resilience? It involves movement toward mutually empowering growth and fostering connections in the face of adverse conditions, traumatic experiences, and alienating social cultural pressures. It is the ability to connect, reconnect, or resist disconnection. This definition is really profound and really talks about what we're going to be focusing on today, is that resilience in a relational concept is to move towards connection instead of moving away and disconnecting and involving just the individual. All right, and so we've talked, I'm sure, at length about what are the strains and stressors in residency, but a couple of the key ones we're going to talk about today, or at least keep in mind, is that there's so much time doing paperwork and less time doing direct patient care, balancing work, family life. And so a lot of our residents are at stages of life where either they have gone straight through college, then med school, then residency, and they have young families and responsibilities there, or it's often a second career, which comes with a whole other host of things that goes on in that life stage. And so balancing those things can be difficult. We also want to acknowledge that there's bullying, harassment, and discrimination, particularly for women and people of color and our LGBTQ residents. And so knowing that that has a big role on what stressors and strains come into the lives of our residents. And then the numbers of hours worked and the duty hour limits, with either that being just that's a lot of time to be spending at work, or feeling like that we have to lie or play that down in some way to protect themselves to be able to get the education they need, as well as protect the program. And so there are a lot of things in these stressor and strains that are not just individual stressors. These are things that come with our families and our programs, and there are a lot of moving parts in how we see these stressors in the lives of residents. And it is by no means conclusive list. And so some protective factors is that focusing on education and appropriate feedback from faculty was productive. And so mentoring is really important in residency. We have somebody that we feel like is safe and will give us appropriate feedback. That is a protective factor. And then establishing meaning making and purpose of our work is protective from burnout in residency. And so limiting that paperwork and those times where we're feeling like we're working, but it's not accomplishing the goal or the intention that we set out to make meaning of in doing this work is protective for burnout. And limiting time doing those things is also protective. And again, this is not a conclusive list, but is something to keep in mind as we go through the potential stressors and strains. And just a couple other notes about residency resiliency is resilience must be systemic, meaning that it's not the responsibility of the resident to foster their own resilience, but it's the responsibility of the system to foster resilience for the individual and commit to program and institutional resilience, and making changes to the whole residency or program or wherever we are at to improve resiliency as a whole. And to accomplish this, one must intervene on the individual, the family or chosen family, the community, and the program and institutional level. And each of these in turn will help make systemic changes for resiliency.
So here, my name is Allie again, and here's a picture of my husband and I. As you can tell, this first picture in the cotton does not look like it is in a big city or in a place that would have a residency nearby, and that's because it's not. So my husband and I met in college, and we spent every day together for 4 years while we were at college, and with the plan to go to medical school, spend that time apart, and then during residency be able to live together as I continued my training. Due to several different reasons, that didn't end up happening, and so now he lives at the farm because you can't move a farm, and I live in Oklahoma City where I am doing my training. Thankfully, this is close enough for us that I can see him often, but that comes with some other stressors too. I could give you a big list about how this turned out well for us, but we all know that's my coping mechanism, and that's not really what we're here to talk about today anyways. So basically, I just want to give a real life example about the stressors and strains that can come from our different family situations. We know that family looks different in residency, whether it's people that are married or have kids, or they have roommates, or their parents live nearby or far away. There's several different examples. So this is just kind of a personal example to bring home the point that there are different stressors and strains that we don't necessarily consider when we think about residency, the resilience that might be necessary to make it through. So first off, I mentioned that we don't live together. So he lives 2 hours away. And so I think the main stressor there is that I don't get to live with my husband, right? But the strains that you think that might come from that one stressor could include driving 2 hours on a Friday night, which has maybe its own stressors, like being tired when you're driving and hitting a deer on the way home from work, and not having that 2 hours at the end of the week to wrap everything up. So then I have to finish those things on the weekend when I want to be spending time with my husband. There's also things like my husband's not at home when I come home from a long day of work to talk about things and kind of review the hard things or celebrate with the exciting things. He's a phone call away, which is great, but sometimes a phone call is just not quite the same as seeing someone in person, giving them a hug, or being able to celebrate together if something's going great. And then just the weekends in and of themselves, having to live in two different places. There's plenty of people that have experienced this, but this is a new kind of adjustment for me to have half of my stuff in one place and half of it in the other. And whenever I want to run errands, that's typically at the end of the workday because I'm tired. I mean, I don't really want to because I'm tired. But on the weekend in the farm town, there's not all the stuff that you would have in Oklahoma City. And then I don't want to spend my whole weekend with my husband doing laundry and cleaning and all of that different stuff. So when we think about stressors of residency, it's easy to think about the paperwork and the things that work itself entails. But whenever you bring other people into this picture is when you can kind of see the scope of what residents are dealing with when it comes to wellness and residency. It's not just the resident, and it's not just the system that they're working in. It's their whole family, community, relational system as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. White, for sharing that. I wonder if we could maybe utilize the chat for just a minute. We're going to talk about a theory that helps us pull all of this together. So we're thinking about, what I love about Allie's example is that we sometimes think of the family as just the source of support, and they definitely are, but there can be strains on the family as well because of the roles and responsibilities of the resident learner. So I wonder if you think about this idea of families as stressors and supports and thinking about the impact of the system on residency training, if you would type, a little bit into the chat of how you've seen that in your own learners or in your own work with residents or medical students. Yeah, so some of the ones that are coming through through the chat are financial stress. Pumping breast milk definitely is very difficult to think about scheduling and carrying it around. Partners that are also residents in a dual medical career, competition in the role that they have, taking care of young children, caregivers for family members, lack of sleep, losing a parent. And a lot of attention too in our comments to single residents that don't have maybe a family to support. And that's really an important thing for us to identify. And we want to emphasize that when we use the term family, we're talking about, yes, the family of creation, maybe and immediate family, but also the family of origin, the family of choice, whoever the residents are, identifying as those clear support people and connected people. Thank you so much for all of your participation in the chat. So many good things that you guys have identified. So we're seeing this impact on our residents and their families, and it can be difficult to, I think, pull together our understanding of this real experience that we're having, but also how we can support residents. And so we think that the family adaptation and family adjustment adaptation response model is a really useful way to kind of carry through this conversation. So you'll hang with us for the theory in just a minute, then we'll have a couple of experiential exercises that we'll do together and that we think would be useful with your residents. So you might be familiar with ABCX model of stress, back to your good foundational psychology classes where a stressful event happens and the response to that or the outcome to that stressful event is filtered through the person's resources and their perceptions. This is a helpful way to think about how people respond to stress and how different stressor or the same stressor can have a different outcome for different people. The family therapy instructor in me can't help but give that a good systems term of multifinality. People can start from the same place, or we can have two residents that seem to have a lot of the same characteristics, but they end up in different places. And the ABCX model can help us explain some of that, but there's a few problems with this model. So for one thing, it would be really nice if we had one stressor at a time, but that's not the way life works. We have these pile-ups. We have a lot of things that happen, and a lot of times our response to managing one part of our stressful situation in our life brings more stress on itself. So maybe a resident is able to arrange with a family member to provide care for their child, but then that, how are we going to get the kid there? How are we going to manage when that person is sick? How are we going to arrange backup care? And all of these different solutions that we come up with sometimes cause more stress in themselves, even when they're helping. The other thing about the ABCX model is that family members or families are active in trying to cope and manage their response. So people are not just kind of a static, I have these resources, I have these meanings, I move to my response, but we are active agents. And this is a really hopeful aspect of the model to me, in that we can encourage people to increase their coping or to use different strategies. And we're really advocating for a multi-layered approach, that we are encouraging our residents to engage in stronger coping, utilizing their resources, managing their resilience. And also we as a system and as the program are attending to what can we do, how can we reduce barriers and strains or create more supports for our residents. So it's a both and. It's not just that it's their responsibility, it's not just that ours, but we're partnering together to support them and their families in this. And then also there's this key component of perceptions and how people perceive what's going on. So we think that this family adaptation and adjustment response model is a really helpful tool for putting a lot of these pieces together. And it's a little overwhelming at first, although there are some, we're going to break down some different pieces of it, but there are some pieces that stand out right away. First of all, I love this image of us being always on a balance, because I think that's how stress feels a lot of times, that we're trying to juggle everything that's going on. And then sometimes we tip over into crisis. But then also that's not static. It moves, and we can move into this new adaptation phase where we're being intentional, we're collecting these things and being really intentional about our resilience. So to break it down a little further, the top part of the model is the adjustment phase. So this is where something has happened and the family has to find a new way of being. And as they're trying to adjust to this stressful situation, they have demands, stressors and strains. And stressors are those things that have a discrete beginning and ending that cause a change in the system. So residency is a stressor. It has a beginning. It will, I promise, have an end one way or the other. But in the meantime, it puts a lot of demand. But the strains are those tensions that we feel when we feel pulled in different directions, when we feel that we need something to change. Allie did a good job of using the stressor and strain language when she was describing her own family situation, that the stressor is residency and having to live apart for this discrete period of time. And the strains that puts on her family is driving back and forth, not having the time to spend together that they want. I think that this is helpful language for talking to residents to help them think broadly about the things that might be accumulating and causing them stress. I've heard so many times from our physicians, they look around and they're like, well, I shouldn't have it bad because, or this person has it worse, or I'm doing okay, I just need to keep going. But I think taking a moment to validate the demands on their time and the stressors and the strains that they're having can help them think broadly about the things. And as we'll talk about in a minute, that gives us some opportunities for hopefully reducing some of those demands. Then we also, on the sort of positive coping side, have our resistance capabilities. So this is the stressful thing has happened. We're not in crisis mode yet. Our family's trying to find our new balance. So we're resisting crisis in this initial adjustment phase. There's resources, so that can be tangible or not. Money is definitely a resource, and having the finances to pay for childcare or to have a place to live or not have food insecurity, that definitely is one. But there's intangible resources as well. So someone's self-esteem, their strong communication in their family, or whatever the assets there are that exist in them as an individual, in their family, or in their community. And so we want to encourage, again, our learners to think really broadly about what resources are available to them. And we also want to hold ourselves accountable as the educators to put resources in place, thinking on those, thinking at those different levels. And then coping are the specific efforts to manage the demands. So the coping is the active things that people are doing to manage the stress. And then tipping the balance a little bit are the meanings. So we know that the way that a person thinks about their life, the mindset that they have, makes a big difference. We hear a lot said about growth mindset. We hear a lot said about grit. Those are both great books that are helpful to conceptualize. But the residents or families in this model have both situational meaning and global meaning. So situational meaning would be like, I see residency as for a time, or I am here to learn, or those specific things that they're assigning to the situation. And then global meaning is more of having a purpose, a connection with kind of more of an existential meaning in who they are. So you see this model in the adjustment phase. The family is using their demands and their capabilities, trying to balance, trying to adjust. The meanings are exerting some influence. But if we tip too far over into the demands, then we move into a crisis. And when we go to crisis, then it brings us down to this adaptation phase. And adaptation is where we are, again, using all of these things to find our new balance, to find our way of adjusting. So this bottom part, the adaptation phase, looks a lot like that top part of the adjustment phase. But the two changes are that we're talking about where we had resistant capabilities before, we were resisting the crisis. Now we have adaptive capabilities. So we're in it, we're figuring out our way through, and some of those resources and coping may be the same, but some of them may be different. And again, we have to find our way to balance those things, because once we adapt and we find our way through in the place we are now, another stressor happens. And we again have to find that balance so that we don't veer into crisis. And we can think about maybe some learners who feel like they're in crisis after crisis after crisis, or ones who are more able to adapt. So to kind of a few of the takeaways that are relevant for us about this model is that some key concepts: the demands, capabilities, meanings, and adjustment and adaptation happen within the context of families. And again, we're using that term family very broadly, and we want to be really inclusive when we're talking to our residents and using this language with them as well. Resilience happens in a dynamic balance over time. It's not static, and it is adaptable and adjustable, which is helpful. But also that means sometimes you have some bad days. And it's this constant attending to balancing the demands and the capabilities to adjust or adapt. But the other takeaway for us is there are a lot of modifiable spots where we can help our learners in their self-discovery and adjustment, and where we can also support them at the program level. So we have kind of taken this model and come up with a couple of different experiential exercises that could be used, and we're going to walk you through them, and then also talk about how they could be used with residents to think about how these structures and strains and capabilities, how they can make sense of them.
Thank you. So I am your experiential leader for the day. I have two different exercises to share that this team has developed and adapted from other resources, and we are posting these to the resource library, and hope they will be useful to you in your personal reflection and exploration, and then hopefully facilitating reflection with your residents. What we're going to begin with is a meditation, the House of You meditation. This is adapted from the Coactive Training Institute, which is a wonderful coaching resource. I'm going to read through this, and it's about 5 minutes long, so just get comfy. If you are comfortable doing so, you can close your eyes or have your gaze fall away from the screen so you're listening to my voice, but not getting the visual cues necessarily. I want you to take 3 deep breaths and let each one go with a little sound. As you're doing that, let your breath move easily in and out. Imagine you are someplace in nature, someplace that you really love. Perhaps it is the ocean, or a cool mountain forest, or a meadow filled with wildflowers. Whatever place fills you with joy and happiness, go there now. It is a beautiful day and the sun is shining. Ahead of you, you see a little path that draws you toward it, and you begin to walk along that path. There's the slightest breeze blowing and it brushes across the back of your hands and arms as you walk. All around you hear the sounds of your favorite setting. Perhaps it is the long roll of the ocean waves or the rustle of the trees. It smells so good, fresh and clean and inviting. Just ahead, you see a little clearing with a house. This is the House of You. Take a moment to create the House of You in whatever way is most pleasing to you. Is this House of You small and cozy, or stately and grand? In your mind's eye, create the House of You. The house is so inviting and enticing that it draws you closer. As you approach, you see over the doorway a sign that says, the House of, and there's your name. You easily and effortlessly move inside of this House of You. As you are standing inside, you notice that there are so many areas or rooms for you to explore. You could spend a lifetime exploring this House of You and never know it fully. Completely unique and totally inviting, the House of You. Just off to the left, you notice an area or a room called the Room of My Emotions. That sounds interesting. You slip inside to explore. What do you find here? Is it light or dark? Is there lots of furniture or none at all? Do you feel demands or is there space to be? Maybe it is easeful moving through the room, or maybe this feels difficult. Take a few moments to explore. You move out of this room now, knowing that you can come back anytime you wish. You know the way. Just off to your right, you find another area or room, the Room of My Body, and you slip inside. What are the sights and sounds and sensations that await you here in the room of your body? Do you have what you need here? Or are there resources missing? Take a little time to explore. And now you move out of the room of your body, and just off to your left, you see another room or area, the Room of My Purpose, that place of courage and action from the heart. So you slip into the room of your purpose. What do you sense and see and smell and feel here? Is there evidence that this room has changed over time, or does it appear fixed in time? I want you to move now to another room. This room is the room of your relationships. You go inside this room to discover and explore. What do you find in the room of your relationships? Perhaps there are others in this room, or a feeling of their absence. Perhaps there is a lightness or a heaviness. Does this room strike you as recently arranged in this way with these people, or is this a new arrangement? Moving back into the central part of the house, you see so many more rooms waiting to be explored and discovered. The unique complexity of you. There is no one on earth quite like you. Let's do just one more room before you go, the room of my, and you choose the name, the room of my blank. You fill it in. It's almost time to go. Before you leave, you might notice whether there are other homes close to you, or if your house stands independently in this clearing. Perhaps you want to say a few words of thanks to this incredible house of you, or you might want to leave a little gift behind. Do whatever feels right to you now. And so you turn to go, knowing that you can come back anytime you wish to visit and explore the house of you. You slip outside into the waiting sunshine and begin making your way along the path, walking. Returning now to the present moment. Take a deep breath. You can wiggle your toes or fingers, or stretch and move your body a little. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. I'm going to move into talking about our second experience, but if people want to put any lines in the chat about how that was for you, we're going to do a fuller debrief after the second exercise. Feel free to use the chat for that. So we have a grassroots drawing here by moi of a house. I'm guessing your house in the House of You meditation was very specific to you. So I invite you all to use that pen or paper to create your own worksheet, but you're welcome to use this one or one that you create with your residents. The House of You meditation does not map on perfectly to this worksheet. We hope that the House of You meditation is an opportunity to reflect, to identify the picture of what is going on internally and externally by scanning emotions, bodies, relationships, purpose, etc. And then translating that into some visual representation of those things. In this particular worksheet, we've created a foundation where one might reflect on sources of meaning. We've indicated that the windows and doors are where energy or things pass in and out of the house. So maybe some things are visible from the outside because windows and doors are open. Maybe windows and doors are closed and things are hidden. In the way that my co-presenters have so eloquently spoken to, we have designated the walls to be both supports and demands. So walls hold up the house, but also depending on the sturdiness of the wall and the construction of the wall, that can also place a demand on the structure of the house, and that can change over time. We have the roof as symbolizing resources, what gives a person shelter, and the chimney for outlets and coping strategies. And finally, we have a rain cloud to represent elements, so external demands, stresses, stressors, and strains. to contrast with some of the internal demands that the individual might feel as represented by walls that need some bolstering up or supporting. You all are welcome to use as much or as little of this guidance to create your house over the next few minutes. We'll just give you a couple minutes to experience that and maybe note some of the things that that came to the surface during the guided meditation. If you don't fancy yourself an artist and you'd rather just write words versus drawing, that's also permitted. I'll allow it. But if you want to get creative, please do. This is just for you.
We are going to include Aubry's worksheet with our presentation when we upload to the resource library. That would make it easy for you to download and use with your residents if you'd like.
Recognizing this is an abbreviated version of what you could do with your residents, let's take one more minute to jot down ideas or any creative representations of what you want to include with this. We have a next slide to move into discussion. So we're kind of combining the debrief and discussion, and we made a decision to keep it a larger group. What was your experience of this demo of the reflective exercises?
I think there's so many processing questions that I can imagine and intend to use with my residents with this. You know, if we're tying it back to the model, we're thinking about all of these modifiable ways that they adjust and adapt, and talking about this dynamicness of their resilience, and where did they find maybe that there were resources that they're not tapping, or boundaries they need to set, or other you know, supports that they need to call in. See some other ideas in the chat of how they could be used during wellness check-ins, at an annual retreat, maybe using it with faculty and with ourselves as well as the resident physicians.
I was thinking about what we were outlining earlier with regard to the theory and how we want so much to impart this relational perspective rather than the more frequent individual resilience perspective, which runs the risk of victim blaming. If you aren't well, take care of that, make some changes. And while we certainly want to empower the individual to make those shifts in the areas that they can, I see this as a good tool in reflecting on what does the resident identify as both sources of support, but also demands. What do they personally have control over in their family system, family of choice, community? And then also, where is advocacy needed to make some shifts, perhaps within the program or in terms of the mentorship they're getting? So using this as awareness building around what is within the resident's control and what is really something that needs to be advocated for on a larger level. And maybe there are some themes that come up if this is done with multiple residents that identify some gaps in the program or the institution that there may be some administrative leverage to change.
Mm-hmm. I think we can broaden up for these last few minutes of our time together and just talk about this concept of resilience as relational, and thinking about supporting our residents in the context of their families and communities, but also the ways that those families and communities sometimes cause strain on the residents as it's their competing demands. Does anybody have any specific ways that you're approaching that in your program that you are, you know, managing? Let's see, Valerie says if we post the processing questions, yes, definitely can do that. Anybody have any thoughts on ways that they're supporting or viewing resilience as relational within your programs?
Something I've tried to do. I don't know how effective it is, but maybe I'll share it with the group. It's not a new idea. I think it's been around behavioral science for a long time. But during orientation with residents, they do personal genograms. And of course, the question is like, what part of the genogram is most important for them in terms of resilience through residency. And so our genograms have focused on like family illness stories, those kinds of things. I'm sure we can make a minor adaptation in our program to say, where are your resilience connections? So like an eco map instead of a genogram, where are your places of resource? Who are your resources? And where are the relationships that you find strain or worry or concern? Yeah. We share a story of our life after the genogram. Each resident gets 30 minutes to share their life to now, and what they highlight or don't highlight usually is based on what they write in the genogram. So maybe that would be something to consider. People tend to share the hard parts versus the parts that strengthen them. So
that's a great thought.
Maybe other residencies do this, but one of my very favorite things that we do at our residency that Dr. Pratt has kind of held up is our partner or spouse or family orientation. So the residents are not invited. In fact, we are told not to show up. And if you have a spouse or you have someone that you think would benefit from this information, they're invited to come to dinner at the clinic. So they see the clinic and see where we are and see what we do. And then Dr. Pratt and our program coordinator, and then some of the spouses of older residents will come and go through like our schedule and how vacation requests work and how like which months are busy and which months are not busy. So that way it's a little bit of expectation setting, like this part's going to be terrible, but I'm here for you to help you get through this, and like let's hang out whenever they're, forms the relationships between the support system. So that's helpful for them to have for each other, but then it also sets some expectations about don't be mad at them if they're not around during this month too much.
Well, I definitely emphasize meaning making during that. And the other thing that's been really helpful is I give the resident family members our EAP phone number and the information and about the EAP. And I have had significantly more partners and family members circle back around and say, hey, can you give me that information for the EAP, than I have residents themselves. And so that's been very helpful place to give them that, and just to like help them build connections between one another. We talk about meaning making, we talk about strains and stressors. It's been really good. Carly, I see you put in the chat that you did that. Is there anything particular you found that was been helpful?
I think for me, it was providing an opportunity for the identified person just to understand some of the lingo of residency and what some of the expectations are on certain rotations. Because I think a lot of this intern year, spouses are not in medicine, families aren't in medicine, where historically we actually have a lot of couples. And so I think it was really important this year to give that just very foundational information to people.
Yeah.
I love the language of the significant person as well. Mm-hmm. That could be,
we had somebody, their best friend
exactly.
came, and just whoever their person they identified was really
like
nice.
That. I think I've used partner orientation before, and they all thought it was something to do with like being a partner in a business, like in a business sense, and that didn't go over well. So I had to no, this is your person. So I like just calling it the person from the beginning.
Yeah,
I've heard from other facilitators of this wonderful wellness intervention with the partners orientation that residents can feel left out if they don't have a romantic partner. So that's a great way to language it.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for the presenters. When you work with residents or faculty on any kind of reflective exercise, how do you work with, there's always some that just won't connect with it, can't connect with it. Kind of, they go through the motions, but it actually ends up being more stressful for them. And I'm just wondering how you address that and how you do this with the different groups.
I'm curious to hear what you say, Aubry. I don't know if this is the right answer, but I kind of ignore it. So if it seems like someone's just not getting into it and not engaging with it, I figure, maybe it's not from them, but as long as they stay like kind of present and aren't being distracting, I think they can benefit from hearing their peers a lot of times model the processing that they're doing. So that's sort of how I handle it. I'm curious to hear, Aubry, what you do.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been in this role not very long, just this moving into my 4th year here. And it took me a couple of years to decide that I wanted to engage in experiential exercises as something that I believe is helpful and that I could authentically present to them as something that I thought was worth their time. And that helped at least me feel empowered to present the information and to do so in a confident way. And I found when I did that, and I really I just went for it. I was would say, who could put on some ambient music in the background that we can do this exercise to when we're drawing? Who can, adjust these blinds so that we're not blinded by light and it feels calmer in here? So I really just channel that that part of me that believes these experiential activities are meaningful, and they tend to follow better with that lead. If they are resistant, I go the same way as Grace has outlined. And I have found that for the creatively resistant among us or uncomfortable, that collage is a lot more accessible. So I have a stack of magazines that I encourage